White smoke billowed above the Sistine Chapel, and the world held its breath in anticipation. Following the historic pontificate of Francis, a native of Medellin, Colombia, ascended to the chair of St. Peter, once again bringing a Latin American to the papacy. Who is Leo XIV, and why did he choose the name of a pope who faced revolutions and global change? The answers may surprise you. In 2013, when Pope Francis was elected, the Catholic world was navigating a period of uncertainty, heightened by a pervasive sense of impending global shifts. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, as he introduced himself, immediately broke with numerous traditional protocols. By choosing the name Francis, in honor of St. Francis of Assisi, he instantly signaled his mission, simplicity, care for the poor, and respect for creation. Throughout his pontificate, Francis enacted profound reforms within the Roman Curia, striving for greater transparency and decentralization. He resolutely confronted corruption and abuse within the Church, demonstrating both firmness and mercy. He issued significant documents, including the encyclical Laudato Si', which called the world to ecological responsibility. He was a pontiff who spoke of building bridges, not walls, and favored dialogue over confrontation. Yet, like any era, this one also drew to a close, whether by resignation, as in the case of Benedict XVI, or by death. Consequently, the chair of St. Peter became vacant once more. Millions of Catholics wondered who could continue this unique and challenging path. Francis's resignation or death signified not only the end of his pontificate, but also the conclusion of a distinctive style, a voice that skillfully blended tradition with openness to the new. As the bells of Rome tolled in mourning or proclamation, the Catholic world once again turned its gaze toward the Vatican. Questions multiplied. Could a worthy successor be found? Would the new pope continue the reforms or choose a different direction? An atmosphere of anticipation, hope, and tension filled the air. With hearts torn between farewell and future, the cardinals gathered for the conclave, their eyes of the world once again fixed on the Sistine Chapel, awaiting the white smoke that would herald the Church's new leader. The conclave commenced in an atmosphere of deep reflection. After Francis's outstanding pontificate, the cardinals understood that electing his successor would be no mere formality. They sought a person who grasped modern realities, yet remained deeply rooted in tradition. Among the most frequently mentioned names were Cardinal Peter Opelec from Nigeria, Cardinal Mateo Zuppi, and Miguel Ángel Herrera from Colombia. It was the latter who surprised many. Herrera, born in Medellin, had a pastoral journey marked by interreligious dialogue, work with impoverished communities, and a firm stance against drug trafficking in his youth, when he served as an auxiliary bishop. A scholar of Latin American theology, an advocate for social justice, but also respected in conservative circles, Herrera represented a bridge between differing views on the Church. After 3 days of voting, white smoke ascended into the Roman sky. The crowd in St. Peter's Square hushed as the Cardinal Protodeacon announced, "Habemus Papam." Soon after, the new pontiff, with a quiet voice and a slight smile, declared, "I have chosen the name Leo in honor of the courage and wisdom of my predecessors." The choice of the name Leo XIV immediately brought to mind two great popes in history. Leo I, also known as Leo the Great, was a defender of orthodoxy and church unity in the 5th century. Leo XIII, in the 19th century, authored the encyclical Rerum Novarum, A landmark in Catholic social doctrine, the new Pope made it clear that his pontificate would also be marked by courage in the face of challenges and a commitment to justice. The crowd erupted in applause. Many had not known his name until that moment, but there was something in his calm gaze that inspired trust. With Francis in their hearts and Leo as their guide, the Catholic Church embarked on a new chapter, and the entire world yearned to know what his first step would be. The first days of Leo XIV's pontificate were closely watched by Catholics, world leaders, and church observers. His first address was brief but profound. Faith should not be a wall that stops, but a light that illuminates all human paths, he proclaimed from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. This phrase resonated globally. Soon after, his first encyclical, Lux Mundi, Light of the World, addressed pressing issues. Leo XIV described poverty as an open wound on humanity's conscience and called upon the Church and governments for concrete action to combat it. He also reaffirmed the ecological commitment initiated by Francis, warning that the climate crisis is not only environmental, but also spiritual. Another strong point of his vision was dialogue with science and technology. During a visit to the Vatican Observatory, he stated, "Faith and reason are not enemies, but allies in the search for truth." He also proposed the creation of an ethical research group. Pope Leo XIV, striving to find common ground between faith and modernity, convened a representative forum, bringing together theologians, scientists, and bioethics experts to collectively reflect on the moral guidelines for technological progress. In the realm of interreligious dialogue, Leo XIV demonstrated openness and a readiness for conversation, meeting with leaders of Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, and Buddhist communities, emphasizing the importance of universal fraternity. Lasting peace is built on mutual respect, he stressed during an interreligious prayer in the Vatican. In the Church's internal policy, the Pope also showed a desire to consider various perspectives. He continued some reforms initiated by his predecessor Francis, expanding lay participation and strengthening local church communities, while avoiding radical changes, preferring the concept of renewed continuity. The first months of Leo XIV's reign indicated a pontificate focused on listening, dialogue, and courage, yet not everyone was satisfied. Alongside widespread approval, doubts and resistance began to emerge. While the new Pope won the hearts of the faithful worldwide, discontent grew in the Vatican's corridors. The Vatican corridors, silent keepers of centuries of church history, filled with whispers of criticism. Cardinal Giovanni Bertolini, prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, expressed concern about what he termed the new pontificate's excessive openness. Continuity with Francis is evident, but we must ensure that tradition is not diluted in this process, Bertolini remarked during a private meeting, information about which, as expected, leaked to the press. He was not alone in his concerns. A group of bishops, primarily from Eastern Europe and the United States, signed a letter calling for doctrinal clarity regarding some of the Pope's statements on moral issues. Leo XIV responded to the criticism with unperturbed calm. In a meeting with Roman priests, he openly addressed the disagreements. The Church has always been in a balance between fidelity to its principles and the necessity of dialogue with the world of each era. This balance is not always easy to achieve, but it is necessary. With his characteristic gentleness, he added, Saint Augustine taught us in essentials unity, in non-essentials liberty, in all things charity. While the Pope addressed internal issues, the world faced new challenges. A humanitarian crisis in Southeast Asia, caused by devastating floods, prompted the Pope to organize an international conference at the Vatican, gathering religious, political leaders and representatives of humanitarian organizations. "We cannot speak of love for neighbor without concrete actions," he declared, opening the event. The initiative had an immediate effect. Governments increased humanitarian aid, and the Catholic Charity Network coordinated an unprecedented effort. The media noted that Leo XIV's direct style, inherited from his predecessor Francis, but with his own distinct characteristics, influenced public opinion and mobilized resources. One of the most memorable moments of this period was the Pope's personal visit to a climate refugee camp in the Philippines. In pouring rain, he visited families who had lost everything. A photograph of the pontiff kneeling in the mud, holding an elderly woman's hands, circulated worldwide. "I came not as a politician or diplomat, but as a shepherd, wishing to share the suffering of his flock," he later explained. This act embodied the words of his first speech: faith as a light illuminating humanity's path, manifested in gestures of empathy and solidarity. At the end of his first year, Leo XIV announced the convocation of a Synod of Renewal. This extraordinary assembly brought together not only bishops, but also clergy, lay people, and even observers not belonging to the Catholic Church. "We need to hear all voices of the people of God," he stated in the bull convoking the synod. Preparation for the event was meticulous. For 6 months, dioceses worldwide conducted public consultations employing participatory methods. The questions were direct. How should the Church serve the modern world? What structures need renewal? How can lay participation be strengthened while preserving the Catholic essence? The answers were diverse, at times contradictory, but the process itself transformed the perception of the Church. "We are learning to walk together, listening to each other," the Pope noted during a general audience. This is the original meaning of synod, to walk together. The event began in October, on the anniversary of the First Vatican Council. In his inaugural address, Leo XIV drew a historical parallel. Just as that council opened the Church's windows to the modern world, the current synod aimed to open its doors to existential and geographical peripheries. Discussions were lively and covered topics such as administrative decentralization. Discussions were lively, covering topics such as the role of women in church life, principles for the formation of clergy, and how the Catholic Church should respond to the ecological crisis. Unlike past events, the media was granted wide access to the sessions, demonstrating the Church's willingness to openly discuss pressing issues. A culminating moment was Leo XIV's personal participation in one of the groups dedicated to poverty and inequality, a departure from established tradition. He, on par with bishops and laypeople, shared his pastoral experience gained in the slums of Medellin. "I came to know the gospel in the eyes of the poor even before I was Pope, even before I was a cardinal," he candidly admitted. The Synod's final document, titled Ecclesia Renovanda, "The Church is Always Renewing," outlined concrete directions for action, expanded autonomy for episcopal conferences, the creation of lay ministries with real authority, the introduction of mandatory ecological requirements for all Catholic institutions, and the development of a new approach to priestly formation, focused on service rather than power. In closing the synod, Leo XIV uttered words that summarized his vision and continuity with his predecessor. Francis taught us to be a church reaching outwards. Now we must learn to be a church constantly renewing itself, faithful to Christ and close to suffering humanity. International press called the event revolutionary in method and evolutionary in content. Meanwhile, in parishes worldwide, the faithful began to feel the first results of this renewal, which, like any profound transformation, would bring both hopes and resistance in the years to come. Over time, Leo XIV's pontificate began to take clear shape. It was not about radical changes, but a new way of practicing Catholicism in the 21st century, being closer to people, more attentive to global problems, without abandoning faith. The Pope actively invested in training young leaders and supported international meetings involving university students, artists, and scientists. Faith is not a legacy to be preserved, but a seed to be sown, he often repeated. This approach sparked interest among new generations, especially in regions where the Church had been losing its influence. The Vatican skillfully utilized social media. Through simple messages and short videos, Leo XIV reached millions. Gradually, he became a global spiritual figure, respected even among non-Christians. During a visit to the UN, his speech on human dignity and social justice was met with a standing ovation. Within the Church, his legacy also strengthened. The decentralization of power in Rome, the empowerment of local churches, and the promotion of dialogue among different cultures and religions became hallmarks of his reign. Leo XIV sought for the Church to be open, as Francis had advocated before him, rather than inward-looking. Some saw him as a political leader, but he always emphasized, "I am merely a shepherd." Nevertheless, his voice was heard at climate summits, peace forums, and global ethical discussions. He proved that the Church could still play a vital and transformative role in the world. Time will tell the true legacy of Leo XIV, but it is already clear that he opened new paths for dialogue, hope, and faith. The Catholic Church, so often criticized for its perceived immobility, is once again seen as a living and dynamic entity. And as history continues its course, Francis's successor is shaping the future of one of humanity's oldest institutions, step by step. Watching Leo XIV interact with climate refugees, getting his hands dirty in the mud, or confronting conservative cardinals in the Vatican corridors, one wonders, can this Colombian Pope truly balance tradition and renewal? Or will tensions ultimately further divide the Church?